It's wonderful to see you all here tonight. My name is Chase Robinson. I'm the president of the Graduate Center, and it is a great pleasure to welcome you to our very first Graduate Center Dissertation Showcase. I begin by thanking tonight's presenters for sharing with us their hard-won knowledge and their research, their insights. Thanks are also in order for the dedicated advisors who guided our students through long, challenging, but ultimately rewarding processes. And of course, to the family members and friends who've been crucial sources of support, thank you for coming. It's wonderful to have you. It's also wonderful to have some faculty and members of our boards of trustees. I trust all of you will leave tonight knowing a thing or two about a thing or two that you may have never considered. That certainly will be the case for me, at least to judge by the topics. I am tremendously proud of the work our students and faculty do, especially the work that they do to create knowledge for the public good. The ability to describe one's work accurately, briefly, and engagingly is no small thing. I learned that myself at my own thesis defense when I took, at least as I recall, close to 10 minutes to answer the very first question put to me by a very, at least at the time he seemed a very harsh examiner. His question that I took close to 7 or 8 minutes to answer: can you describe your dissertation in one sentence? I should have said no. It's a great pleasure to welcome now to the podium Senior Vice President and Provost Joy Connolly, who is the wonderful guide of our academic community here at the Graduate Center. Tonight's program is very much a result of Joy's vision, her vision that we broaden the impact of scholarship that takes place here at the GC. Joy, thank you for your leadership, thank you for your commitment, and please welcome Joy Connolly.
Thanks, Chase. That was a very kind introduction, and thank you all for coming. It's my very great pleasure to welcome you to our very first Graduate Center Dissertation Showcase. So tonight, 16 doctoral candidates have the chance to show off very, very, very briefly, to them, I think it's unimaginably briefly, the thorough, original, and well-documented work that they've been doing over the last few years. And all of you, and especially those family and friends who have been able to come here tonight, you now have the opportunity to hear why you don't see enough of them. These students represent the more than 3,700 doctoral students whose scholarship is at the very heart of what we do at the Graduate Center. We're the home, as I hope all of you know, of groundbreaking research, award-winning research in the sciences, in the social sciences, in the humanities, and the arts. And our presenters mirror that. They come from disciplines across our more than 30 doctoral programs, from English to neuroscience, urban education to music. I can only give you a little taste of what they do day to day. They're going to give you a much more vivid sense of that in a couple of minutes, but I'll just say they've spent precious time, many hours, pipetting in labs and searching through archives. They've analyzed data, they've transcribed notes, they've written, edited, re-edited, reorganized, rewritten, and re-edited again, and probably over and over if their writing process is anything like mine. Most of them, I should say, have already defended their theses before their committee, so they've faced the question that President Robinson was asked by his tough examiner. But after all that, I'm very proud to say, they had enough juice left in them to take our challenge to distill their labors into 3 dramatic minutes that will offer us a view into the importance of their research. For me, I have to say this evening brought back a vivid and somewhat painful memory of my own, not of my dissertation defense, but a memory of my first time on TV as a scholar serving as a commentator on the History Channel in a series on Roman history. Now, not only was I faced with a producer who was also the interviewer, who had titled his show Roman Vice, which was challenge enough because you can just imagine the way his questions kept venturing into X-rated territory. He wanted to give the show some zing. So that was its own challenge, but I just had to cope with the cruel pressure of the clock. And all I can remember is the expression on his face going from hopeful to despairing as he would ask me the same question with the cameras rolling repeatedly each time, and every time I swear to you, I would compress my answers. I would make them shorter, and he would still cry, compress, compress. My problem wasn't just that I suffered from professoritis, and remember the word professor derives from the Latin word meaning speak aloud. It was mainly that I was totally untrained for my 15 minutes of TV fame. And by the way, I'm sure they weren't 15 minutes, it was probably more like 4. So I'm delighted to say that tonight's presenters are in a much happier place than I was in walking into that makeshift TV studio, because they chose to submit applications and they were selected by a panel of judges for this showcase, and they went through a process of preparation and feedback for tonight. It's with immense pride that we showcase the extraordinary work of our doctoral students. And very soon they're going to join 15,000 Graduate Center alumni whose expertise is found everywhere you look, in governments, in government and nonprofits, in education, on concert stages, in technology, in industry and startups, everywhere. I'm very happy to say that many of the students you're going to hear from in just a few minutes already have jobs lined up, including faculty positions at colleges and universities around the country, and positions at Google, Mount Sinai Health System, the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, and a specialized biotechnology PR firm. Great achievements. I want to thank, yes, exactly. I want to thank all of tonight's intrepid presenters. I want to thank them for breaking new ground with this evening and for taking this step into new territory for us in terms of public presentation. And I want to thank, too, their dedicated advisors. And you can look in the back of your program for the names of the people and the offices most involved in this collegial effort. As you'll hear in just a moment, the work of these students highlights the multiple ways that doctoral education here at the Graduate Center in the middle of New York City prepares our graduates for work inside and outside the academy. Their skills in research and writing and teaching, their ability to think critically and collaboratively across disciplines, all of these things and the other skills and talents you're about to see are vital preparation for careers in a complex and unpredictable world. The world needs to know about your work, and we, the world, need your talent, your ambition, your smarts, your research. We know how eager you are to begin, so please help me welcome our first presenter from Behavioral and Cognitive Neuroscience, Miguel Briones.
So what if I told you that there exists a compound that can help reduce symptoms related to inflammation? Now what if I told you that this same compound could be used to reduce symptoms related to psychiatric disorders? And what if I mentioned that you can probably find this compound in your spice cabinet? My dissertation focused on whether curcumin, an organic compound found in turmeric, could be used to reduce symptoms related to psychiatric disorders, such as PTSD. In the United States alone, around 8% of the population suffers from PTSD. Patients often fail to reduce their trauma. Patients often fail to reduce the traumatic memories. And as many as 50% of patients fail to respond to the medication or exposure-based therapy. Even worse, those who do respond to medication often suffer from debilitating side effects. So there has been a search for a compound that could be used that could not only provide maximum efficacy, but also reduce the amount of side effects a patient suffers. This is where I reintroduce curcumin. Curcumin has been studied in the United States. Curcumin has been studied extensively, and it is found to reduce symptoms related to inflammatory and neurological disorders. Even better, curcumin has been found to reduce symptoms related to clinical depression. And then I mentioned that in all studies, curcumin has been found to have little to no side effects. And so, if it's true that curcumin can reduce symptoms related to clinical depression, could curcumin also reduce symptoms related to PTSD, such as the reoccurrence of a traumatic memory? My dissertation approached this question by using an animal model of traumatic memory formation called Pavlovian threat conditioning, in which a tone becomes paired with a foot shock, so that the animal, in my case a rodent, associates a tone with a foot shock. Thus, when the tone is played by itself, the animal remembers the threatening memory of the foot shock. I found that by feeding rodents a 5-day diet of curcumin, we were able to impair the recall of this threatening memory. Further, we can mimic exposure-based therapy, a process in which patients are repeatedly presented a frightening stimulus in order for them to learn to reduce their fear response. By presenting the animal, in my case a rodent, the threatening tone repeatedly within a session, after they have formed a tone shock association. This allows them to form what we call an extinction memory, that, when recalled in the presence of a tone, allows them to inhibit their fear response. Interestingly, I found that a 5-day diet of curcumin enhanced the ability of rodents to form an extinction memory, and that this enhancement lasted for well over a week. Therefore, these findings provide evidence for two things: that curcumin not only impairs the recall of a threatening memory, but also enhances the extinction of a threatening memory. Two findings that have therapeutic value to PTSD patients. Thus, curcumin can potentially be used as a pharmacological tool against psychiatric disorders that are characterized by recurring threatening memories. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Diana Moore, and I'm from the History Department. In the mid-19th century, Italian patriots fought to liberate and unify their nation, and were aided in their efforts by a group of transnational women. I want to begin by telling you two stories about these women. My first story is about Jessie White Mario, an English woman who went on 4 separate lecture tours from 1856 to 1862 to cultivate support for Italian unification. White Mario was quite unique for her time, as proper women were expected to remain in the home and to refrain from holding informed political opinions, and they rarely spoke out in public. White Mario, however, gave exceedingly political and public lectures, which were widely attended and which received substantial press coverage. My second story focuses on a group of women who came together in the fall of 1862 to organize a charitable bazaar in which they would sell off collected items to raise money for a common cause. This was in many ways a standard practice for middle-class women, but this was by no means a standard bazaar. Its organizers coordinated their actions from bases in Italy, Switzerland, and Britain, and the money they collected was intended to finance radical Republican revolution in the Italian cities of Rome and Venice. In my dissertation, I studied how White Mario, the women of the bazaar, and women like them both challenged existing standards for feminine behavior and used particularly feminine or domestic methods to contribute to revolutionary nationalism and later state building. In the example of the bazaar, for instance, the women adapted traditionally feminine behaviors associated with small-scale local charities to finance international revolution. I argued that these women took advantage of a period of instability and fluidity to make an impact on Italian politics. Through an examination of their published and private works, I showed how they publicized, fundraised, and conspired for Italian unification, and how after the physical unification of the Italian state was complete, worked to continue on its utopian dreams through their work as biographers in primary educational institutions and in the campaign against state-regulated prostitution. In doing so, I challenged the boundaries between religiously grounded charitable activities, so often associated with women and the private sphere, and presumably secular political campaigns, more so often associated with men and the public sphere. Overall, I not only reveal how women, when denied the right to vote, used alternative paths to make an impact on politics in the 19th century, but prompt a reconsideration of the ways in which we understand both charity and politics in the present. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Joy Barrero from nursing. So picture this scenario. Good afternoon, Dr. Smith. I'm Dr. Barrero. I see that you have a PhD in English. Very impressive. The results of your endoscopic retrograde cholangiography shows that it is positive for acute ascending cholangitis and cholecystitis. There's an obstruction of your common bile duct due to cholelithiasis, and that is what is causing your pain, your jaundice, your icteric sclera, and your pruritus. You are scheduled for exploratory laparoscopy tomorrow with the possible open cholecystectomy. You'll be NPO after midnight and receive a probiotic, acidophilus, to decrease your intestinal flora. You may also be intubated while under the general anesthetics. Any questions? No. Here's the consent. Please sign. So, on the serious note, what is health literacy? It is the ability to process and use your health information. As I conducted my review of the literature in patient education and health literacy, I discovered the relationship between poor patient outcomes and poor health literacy. This discovery led me to developing my research topic on patient education and the gap that exists between what the nurse and doctor says and what the patient hears and understands. Further review of the literature revealed how healthcare education across all disciplines, nursing, medicine, pharmacy, nutrition, etc., do not emphasize or include health literacy in their curriculum. Health literacy is rarely addressed in these programs, and the gap in healthcare education was very surprising and concerning to me as both a clinician and a nurse educator preparing my nursing students for entry into the nursing profession. What is the significance? The lack of health literacy training in healthcare professions affect those who are in direct patient contact, those that prepare the written and verbal healthcare information, and those that design the signage in the various healthcare facilities. Research shows that health literacy awareness will result in effective patient education, which in turn can improve patient outcomes and save valuable healthcare dollars. So I developed a health literacy education module that I named the Barrero Helm. It included the didactic program with the pre and a post test to determine the effectiveness of health literacy knowledge, skills, and awareness in pre-licensure nursing students. I had the nursing students build a toolkit of health literacy strategies such as Ask Me 3, the Teach Back method, the brown bag for medications, and the newest vital signs, a program to teach our patients how to read a medication label. I presented this module to 180 nursing students in the CUNY system. Upon completion, the students had a variety of evidence-based tools to use in the clinical setting. These tools could be used with patients with different learning styles, the visual, auditory, and kinetic. The results of the post-tests were analyzed using SPSS software and showed significant improvement in all content areas. As a result of my dissertation, I envisioned that healthcare providers in all disciplines will have health literacy knowledge, skills, and awareness so they can teach their patients in an effective, patient-centered manner, and that the public can enhance their participation in meeting their healthcare need. By the way, Dr. Smith had an infected gallbladder and it had to come out. And
good evening. My name is Brian Jones from Urban Education. Late one night in the first week of 1966, 22-year-old Sammy Young Jr. stopped at a gas station in Tuskegee, Alabama, to use the restroom. Young got into an altercation with 69-year-old gas station attendant Marvin Segrest, who shot and killed him. Both Young, who was black, and Segrest, who was white, both came from old Tuskegee families who had lived in the town for many generations. The murder shattered the town's image as a model city, peacefully on its way to progress in the absence of the rancor and protests that rocked so many southern towns at that time. Crucially, Young was not only black, but a Navy veteran and a student at Tuskegee Institute, one of the most well-known and wealthy historically black colleges in the country in the middle of the 20th century, and a school that, since its founding in 1881, served as a political and educational capital of Black America. That exalted status was due in no small part to the efforts of Tuskegee Institute's founder, Booker T. Washington, who preached a cautious political philosophy, to say the least, and developed an educational practice to match it. We normally think of W.E.B. Du Bois as Washington's sharpest critic, but this dissertation explores the criticisms of students on the campus that Washington founded, demonstrating a pattern of Tuskegee student protest that goes all the way back to the 19th century. My study focuses on the 1960s student movement at Tuskegee Institute, based on oral history interviews with 20 former Tuskegee students, administrators, and teachers, and thousands of documents from 3 Alabama archives. I found that the Tuskegee student movement was wide-ranging, dynamic, and influential. Tuskegee students like Sammy Young Jr. participated in desegregation and voting rights campaigns in the town of Tuskegee and throughout the surrounding Black Belt counties. We have forgotten that by the end of 1966, Tuskegee was widely considered a center of the Black Power movement, as much as Oakland, California was. 11 months after Sammy Young Jr. was murdered, Marvin Segrest was acquitted by an all-white jury. Tuskegee students were shocked that their administrators did not seem to share their hurt and rage, which led them to interrogate the philosophy of the campus and the education they were receiving there. In 1968, several hundred Tuskegee students took the Board of Trustees members hostage for 2 days. They presented the trustees with plans to transform Tuskegee Institute into a black university, a discussion that was cut short by the arrival of the Alabama National Guard. Booker T. Washington's political and educational legacy continue to be the subject of tremendous debate. But in this study, for the first time, the voices of Tuskegee students will have their say in the scholarly record. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Min from Computer Science. When was the last time you spoke to a voice assistant like Siri or Alexa? Researchers estimate in 2 years, 4 out of every 10 Americans will use Amazon Echo or Google Home, generating an expected $180 billion in revenue for the market. While using voice assistant has become a daily occurrence, few of us have stopped to think about how automatic speech recognition softwares learn to understand human languages. The answer is a language model, a mathematical model that scans billions of utterances from writing sources including newspapers, magazines, and Wikipedia to predict queries such as set alarm in 7 p.m. So the big challenge is how to adapt a pre-trained language model on written data to more accurately make predictions on our daily spoken languages. And this challenge is a vital one, since voice-powered search is fast replacing typing for many technology users around the world. Collaborating with Google's speech team, my research demonstrates that by only fine-tuning the decision-making part of a pre-trained language model on spoken transcript, it can quickly become expert in the spoken domain. The volume of spoken transcript required is only as few as 1/10,000th of written data. While old approaches takes 2 days to complete adaptation, our method only takes 2 hours. Moreover, our adapted language model is 30% more confident about its predictions. Besides, I have learned a lot of methods and explored a lot more to teach a language model more effectively leverage non-linguistic signals. For example, if we know a person is sending a query from Google Maps in Italy, then the language model can more easily pick up the word Firenze rather than Fianchi. This results in 21% more confident predictions and 3% fewer recognition errors for Italian speech. We have seen great success for majority languages speech recognitions, such as for English or Italian, but we should not ignore the other 1,600 minority languages spoken around the world. Sadly, with less of an archive of recordings of these languages, it is nearly impossible to train an accurate language model. Fortunately, even with as few as 10-hour recordings, some universal speaking habits can be preserved. For example, if a speaker mentioned Semper Grita in Tagalog language, then Semper Grita is more likely to be mentioned again in the following conversation. By applying machine learning algorithm to more accurately characterize this effect, I improved 2% of spoken term detection performance for 6 low-resource languages: Vietnamese, Turkish, Tagalog, Zulu, Tamil, and Pashto. This research would help a larger population who speak low-resource languages around the world to embrace the benefits enabled by the use of voice search technology. Once graduated, I will join Google's speech team to continue the exploration. Thank you.
Chloe Ray Edmondson from the theater department. So I suspect that more than a few of you in this room share my passion for two of New York's most popular pastimes, seeing theater and drinking. Dionysus is the god of both wine and theater, after all. My inspiration for this project began when I was offered a goblet of red wine by an actor in an immersive theater production in 2007. Now, to be clear, a play is generally considered immersive if it places spectators within the action and the narrative of the play, allowing them to roam around, interact with props, set pieces, and actors, and even sometimes eat and drink as part of the show. I drank the wine gladly until the actor informed me that it had been poisoned. This was fictional, of course, but it got me thinking about the imbalances of power that arise when drinking culture intersects with theater and performance. As temperance historian W.J. Rorabaugh has said, drinking often occurs in proximity to power. So while this project began as a simple noticing of the presence of alcohol within the immersive theater situation, it progressed into a far wider analysis of how drinking has worked historically in facilitating performances of power both on stage and off. My archival research took me deep into the New York Public Library, where I read city guides describing the booze-fueled environments of the 19th century concert saloons on the Bowery, where attractive costume waitresses served drinks to male patrons, and then afterwards would perform song and dance numbers on stage. It also led me to read countless newspaper reviews of champagne dinner theater, which was especially popular in the 1980s. And then it also led me to hours of interview footage with former Cotton Club dancers from Harlem. In all of these historical examples, immersion and intoxication were never ideologically neutral practices. In fact, both play significant roles in reinscribing certain racial, spatial, gendered, and economic inequalities that are already at play in New York City. For example, white patrons of Harlem's Cotton Club were intoxicated not only by the bootlegged whiskey swirling around in their highball glasses, but also on the stereotyped fantasy of blackness that was fostered by the venue and the performances therein. My contemporary research, on the other hand, has led me to dozens of strange and wild theater performances in New York City. As Dionysus would have it, many instances of drunken audience members taking unusual liberties were what I encountered. A recent BuzzFeed article revealed that masked spectators at the immersive production Sleep No More, which is ongoing in Chelsea, have been drunkenly groping performers. At Cynthia von Buehler's immersive Illuminati ball, I witnessed drinking as an intensely gendered experience when I found myself alone in a bathroom with 3 naked strangers who were taking a milk bath together. So, while drinking may not be part of every spectator's theatrical experience, I argue an even more important point, that we are still all under the influence and potentially at risk of the spatial and social effects of dominant, enculturated drinking practices when alcohol intersects with immersive theater and performance. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Eric Knutson in the psychology department. Raise your hand if you believe your job could be automated within the next 10 years. Recent estimates suggest that at least 47% of all jobs have the potential to be partially or fully automated in the near future. So we as job seekers must expand our thinking about the ways that our skills can be useful in the workplace. Today, it's easier than ever to hop online and search thousands of jobs, and we guide that search based on our education, our training, and our work history, because it's what's familiar to us. It's what we know. But if the current application of our skills is in declining demand, this job search breaks down. When we take too narrow a focus on our skills, we miss the potential applications of our skills in less obvious jobs. What if I told you that a computer support specialist possesses many of the core skills required of an air traffic controller, or that some key aspects of work as a stage or theater actor overlap with those of a salesperson? To understand this overlap, we must first scale up our ideas about our skills. You're not just proficient in Microsoft Excel, you're strong in numerical reasoning. You're not just good at customer support, you're effective at analyzing systems and problems. Broadening the lens through which we view our skills is the first step to expanding our ideas about opportunity in the workplace. That's why, for my dissertation, I launched a platform for exploring the skill overlap between occupations. Users can explore networks of occupations connected by similarity in their required skills, and they can learn about and consider occupations that they might never have otherwise considered. In a series of empirical studies, we found that by pairing this tool with some light education about broader skill-based thinking, job seekers showed measurable improvement in the breadth of skill applications that they considered, and increased expectancy that they could secure satisfactory employment within 3 months. In a longitudinal follow-up study, we found that among a subset of unemployed individuals who were not already prone to adaptive thinking in their careers, 40% of those completing this training secured satisfactory employment versus just 5% among those not completing it. There are many, many factors that influence employment success, but this early evidence suggests that there's promise in learning to scale up our ideas about our skills. Automation may take away some current applications of our skills, but it can't take away all of them. If we can teach ourselves and the organizations that hire us to see the broader applications of our work skills, there's no telling where our careers turn next, but it won't be down a dead end. Thank you.
I'm Jian Li from Music Program. The renowned American composer and critic Virgil Thomson claimed to have felt 7 orgasmic musical climaxes during the active love duet of Richard Wagner's Tristan and Isolde. Although Thomson did not detail the occurrences themselves, there has long been consensus that the duet carries a sensation of sexual ecstasy. Indeed, when people listen to music, they intuitively perceive the waxing and waning of tension, even without preliminary musical knowledge or formal training. But can climax be explained as more than just a sensational, intuitive phenomenon? Is it possible to provide specific operational parameters for climax occurrence? Through what mechanisms do we feel growing momentum or dissipation of energy? In fact, the process and workings of such climaxes have been largely overlooked in music scholarship, being considered too intuitive or basic to merit serious academic attention. I try to address this neglect by presenting musical climax as a formally constructed process operated by specific musical parameters. To illuminate this dynamic process, I developed the climax archetype. As seen in the diagram, the climax archetype consists of initiation, acceleration, optional delay, high point, and abatement. Let's listen to a musical example, and the passage is drawn from the aria La Mamma Morta, They Killed My Mother, from Umberto Giordano's Andrea Chenier, and here a song by Maria Callas. In the genre of opera, music and drama are united as one entity. Musical climax, with its aggressively rising dynamic and subsequent decline, is often used when the drama involves intense situations, ecstatic reunion of lovers, heartfelt filial affection, and fanatical outbursts of suppressed emotion. The climax archetype explicates the mechanism of this compelling phenomenon by presenting it as a logical and reasonable process. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jagadisha Devashri Dekas, and I'm from the Social Welfare Program. Traditional public health HIV prevention has largely focused on how and why people become HIV positive and then transmit the virus to other people. HIV affects black men who have sex with men, affects black men who have sex with men more than any other population in the United States. The way to think about it is that this is a very small population with high infection rates. Men who have sex with men, or MSM for short, is a public health term used to describe sexual behavior rather than sexual orientation, such as gay or bisexual, if many people are probably more familiar with. In New York City specifically, black men who have sex with men, or black MSM, account for a third of all new infections among men. Again, a small population with high infection rates. Because I'm a social worker who's worked extensively in public health, specifically HIV prevention, for a number of years, I was motivated to conduct this work because we know little about those black MSM who remain HIV negative. My study sought to identify strengths and resiliencies that have not been captured by traditional public health approaches. Now, because of my work, we know a little bit more about how these men stay HIV negative. Public health HIV prevention research is not focused on black men who remain HIV negative. I aspire to change that with my work. My black MSM resilience theory proposes reasons for how and why they remain HIV negative by identifying some of the ways that they take care of themselves. My research is part of a growing body of knowledge that focuses on strengths and resilience. Specifically, I focus on what members of this population are quote-unquote doing right to remain HIV negative, rather than taking a traditional public health approach, which has focused on quote-unquote what they do wrong to get HIV and to pass it on to others. What I found is that the black men's ability to exercise agency in their sexual relationships, such as insisting that their partners use condoms, their close relationships with people who support them in their lives, who expect them to do everything possible to remain HIV negative, and how they understand their HIV risks based on their public health knowledge, all contributed to their ability to remain HIV negative. My black MSM resilience theory proposes the importance of how all these things work together in their lives. Most important to understand is that for these black men's strengths and resiliencies really lie at the intersection of their co-occurring identities, racially and sexually, as black men and as men who have sex with men. They originate from survival strategies that Black people have employed for generations to survive in a society that still continues to be hostile toward them. By focusing on their strengths and resilience, my research and Black MSM resilience theory offer examples of how public health HIV prevention can move away from cookie-cutter approaches to reduce HIV in this population. Based on what I have found, social workers, because I'm a social worker, I'll say that, and other people in their lives can really help support Black MSM to remain HIV negative in a number of ways. One, they can help them understand how they exercise their agency in their sexual relationships to remain HIV negative. Two, they can help them and encourage them to draw upon their social supports in their lives. So these can be their families of origin, their families of choice or chosen families, their friends, and their peers. Three, they can help them understand their HIV risk based on public health information that's available. So with this research, I aim to elevate the voices of HIV-negative Black MSM, their strengths and resiliency specifically, because it's important for public health to really capitalize on these resilience factors and really help support them remaining negative. Thank you.
Hello, Rebecca Seifert, Art History. Loretta Venturelli, the subject of my dissertation, joins the ranks of the many women, virtually unknown until recently, who had a historic role in the formation of 20th century architecture. She was an architect, a professor, a theorist, and an artist. The first woman, in fact, to have drawings acquired by MoMA's Department of Architecture and Design in 1974. She also collaborated with famed contemporary artist Donald Judd, a larger-than-life figure known for his minimalist objects, his no-nonsense attitude, and later for his architectural innovations and interventions in the remote town of Marfa, Texas. There, he installed his own work and that of his contemporaries on an abandoned army base, in former airplane hangars and barracks. Marfa has since become a pilgrimage site for art lovers, and Judd's role in shaping this town has endured to this day. In film and in television, such as Jill Soloway's Amazon series, I Love Dick, in which Kevin Bacon plays a rugged, Judd-like figure, and celebrated in major museum retrospectives, like the upcoming show at the MoMA. However, despite this long obsession with Judd's work, there's always been a missing piece to the puzzle, and that's Loretta Venturelli. As my research reveals, Venturelli collaborated with Judd for about 10 years, from the late 70s to the late 80s, lived and worked with him in Marfa, and New York for that matter, yet her name has been completely absent from any discussion of Judd's work until now. I arrived at this topic somewhat by chance while writing a seminar paper on Judd's critique of postmodern architecture. My professor said, "You know, I know a woman who he was dating at that time, an Italian woman, an architect. Maybe there's something there." Another professor suggested, yeah, pillow talk. Venturelli's work was unified by an interest in how spaces are shaped by history and memory, especially through architectural typology. Typology, broadly speaking, is the classification of types based on shared fundamental characteristics. Each one has a particular purpose, and thus a different set of characteristics that best corresponds to that purpose. In Marfa, Venturelli proposed that types suited to that very hot and dry climate, specifically the courtyard, could be combined with other building types, like the airplane hangars already on site. Each type carried with it a history and the possibility to convey meaning and create a new hybrid. This kind of thinking influenced Judd's Marfa compound and became part of the reason that he's been praised as an innovative architect. In this Me Too era, Venturelli's exclusion eliminates a number of important issues that are central today, especially the sexism that continues to skew the discourse on collaborations between romantic partners, prompting an imperative question. How do we open up space for those who have been left out, ignored, or written out of history? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey Binder from the English department. My dissertation examines the ways people thought about the relation between language and algorithms in the 3 centuries before the development of the modern computer. I became interested in this topic while I was working as a programmer by day and pursuing a master's degree in literature by night. I was struck by the disconnect between the technical methods of programming and the interpretive methods by which we study culture. This disconnect is becoming a major problem at present, as technology companies like Facebook and Google gain ever more influence on people's lives. My dissertation provides a historical perspective on this problem and suggests some ways in which we can better understand the effects of algorithms on culture. My work focuses primarily on the relation of algorithms to ordinary language and to poetics. As an example, consider the use of the word friend on Facebook. In everyday use, the word friend has a complex range of meanings and emotional resonances. But when the word friend appears in the Facebook interface, the logic of the system gives it a special function that differs from the meaning it ordinarily has. While this may seem like common sense, my research shows that people thought about the relationship between these two different types of meaning in very different ways in the past centuries. My project divides this history into 3 stages, which are exemplified by the 3 images you see here. In the first, roughly the 17th century, some mathematicians believed that the meaningfulness of algorithms was guaranteed by divine providence. One thinker from this period, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, dreamed of creating a universal system of computation based on symbols like the ones you see on the left, which were supposed to represent things in a non-arbitrary way. In the 18th century, this view gave way to a second approach that I call the Enlightenment one. Rather than treating the correspondence between algorithm and meaning as divinely guaranteed, Enlightenment thinkers, such as the French mathematician Nicolas de Condorcet, sought to create this correspondence by changing the way people think. While in hiding during the Reign of Terror, Condorcet attempted to turn algebra into a universal language that would completely replace existing languages like English and French. This scheme was supposed to make people more rational, and thus to prevent the sort of political discord that had enveloped France and that would soon result in Condorcet's death. The situation has been drastically different since the mid-19th century. Whereas Condorcet had attempted to eliminate all traces of words from his universal algebra, modern computer code, as shown on the right, often has bits and pieces of words embedded in it. Unlike the systems of Leibniz and Condorcet, computer code does not take over all the functions of ordinary language, but rather separates the technical details of algorithmic logic from the cultural factors involved in the establishment of meaning. In my view, this separation is potentially bad for democracy because it gives a disproportionate amount of power to those who control the algorithms. But the possibility exists of other ways of relating algorithm and meaning. One alternative, I argue in my dissertation, would be a poetic view of computation. That is, a view that embraces the ability of computers to bend the meanings of words in new directions, as they have done with the word friend. My dissertation offers this poetic approach as a new framework in which people without extensive technical knowledge of algorithmic logic can think critically about the ways computers are changing our culture. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Emily Goldsmith, and I'm from the business department. I can clearly remember the day when I found out that I was accepted into my PhD program. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was sitting on my couch watching a college basketball game. But what sticks out most in my memory is that I just couldn't believe that I got in. Something seemed wrong. I wanted to call my parents and tell them the great news, but something made me double-check the email again. I thought that there was a mistake. These feelings of doubt continued to persist as I reviewed the acceptance email. What if they sent the email to the wrong person? What if the committee made a mistake and mixed up my application? What if I had misled the committee in my interview? These feelings of doubts persisted after I started the program. From an objective point of view, I shouldn't have felt like this. I had a strong application and was a great fit for the program. I started to realize that other PhD students felt the same way. We were all experiencing the imposter phenomenon. The imposter phenomenon is the inability to internalize achievements. This leads to feelings of doubt and the desire to avoid being detected as a fraud from others. As I started researching the topic, I realized that 70% of people have experienced the imposter phenomenon. This is something that is experienced by people across all ages, races, genders, incomes, and occupations. Despite the fact that it is so prevalent, it has never been studied in a marketing or consumption context. I do experimental work, so my first challenge was to develop an imposter phenomenon manipulation. This needed to be done so that in my experimental groups, I could be sure that the only difference between conditions was due to people feeling like an imposter or not. After I developed the manipulation, I wanted to see how feeling like an imposter influences consumption choices. I found that imposters are more likely to select products that allow them to feel competent or likable. For example, when given the choice between a public option, such as a t-shirt, or a private option, such as a notepad, imposters are more likely to choose the public option in order to demonstrate to others that they're competent. Another example is that when given the choice between clear sunscreen or tinted sunscreen, imposters choose the tinted sunscreen to cover up perceived imperfections. This is done because they believe that if they have a better physical appearance, they'll be more likable to other people, and then other people will not detect them as a fraud. These findings are useful for marketers because retailers and companies can have products available to alleviate the negative feelings associated with feeling like an imposter. Additionally, based on the process of developing the imposter manipulation, I know that by simply changing the wording in advertising and promotions can change whether someone feels like an imposter or not. The imposter phenomenon is incredibly prevalent, and it is imperative that continued attention be given to the topic in both the popular press and in academic research. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Chet Jordan, and I am a graduate of the PhD program in urban education and an assistant professor at CUNY's Gutman Community College. In November, I defended a dissertation that compared two of CUNY's most recent community college initiatives: Accelerated Study and Associate Programs, or ASAP, and Gutman Community College. Grounded in an historical framework demonstrating a trajectory of policy reforms implemented since the university's founding in 1961, this study evaluated how these two experimental programs were part of a protracted period of attempts at correcting stubbornly low community college completion rates, and how both employ similar yet unique mechanisms for promoting student success. Since its opening in 2012, I have been a member of the faculty at Gutman Community College. When the idea of opening a new community college was formed during the height of the recession era, its main objectives were to increase community college graduation rates and to provide the larger university community with evidence-based research for how best to implement broad-scale reform initiatives. Gutman was unique. It was the first community college opened at CUNY in over 4 decades, and it included some of the widely accepted best practices in 2-year college reform. Most notably, Gutman eliminated zero-credit remedial programs in favor of co-requisite courses designed to weave developmental coursework with credit-bearing college courses so that students would not waste financial aid dollars attempting to move through layers of remediation. In addition to this departure from the traditional community college model, Gutman provided an alternative math pathway to the college algebra gatekeeper course, one which only 30% of students historically pass. Socially, the college ensured that students consistently interacted with advisors and were supported on their full-time college journeys with MetroCards, stipends, and financial aid. After 5 years of operation, I was curious to understand how the model was working and what the academic outcomes for its graduates were. For the purposes of statistical comparison, I chose a similar cohort of students in the ASAP program at the Borough of Manhattan Community College. The ASAP program has many of the same structural components as does Gutman, except that ASAP works within already established colleges and does not require students to complete a specific curriculum. Whereas Gutman was heavily invested in the curriculum and pedagogical execution of the model, ASAP relies on support mechanisms to help students toward completion. The statistical findings indicated how each model could benefit from the strengths of the other. First, Gutman requires students enroll in courses that meet 22 hours a week. Because of the time-consuming structure of many of its courses, if a student is not successful in one or more courses, there is evidence to suggest that he or she is more likely to withdraw from the college rather than to retake a course. In ASAP, unsuccessful students are more likely to retake courses which meet for the normal 3-hour time block per week. Second, Gutman students are more likely to graduate and graduate on time than ASAP students. ASAP students who are remedial still are consigned to zero-credit courses, slowing down their progress toward completion. Gutman students, on the other hand, earn credits from the moment of enrollment, making it more likely they will finish on time. It is my hope that these findings will benefit the policy decisions made by both programs, and particularly Gutman, where I plan to work alongside faculty and administration to improve our educational model as we prepare for a period of growth in the coming years. Thank you.
Good evening. I am David Rasmussen from Political Science. My dissertation is entitled The Politics of United States Army Doctrine. After serving 21 years as an Army officer, I became inspired to understand if politics affects the Army. Prior to 2 deployments to Afghanistan, the Army unit I was assigned to was organized, trained, and equipped to fight mid-intensity conventional warfare against Soviet-style mechanized and armored ground forces. Because of this, I do not believe that my unit, and many others like it, were as well prepared for the challenges we face in Afghanistan as we might have otherwise been. This was a puzzle to me. Why did we continue to prepare for tank battles when we knew we would conduct counterinsurgency operations? There are certainly many possible explanations for this. As a student of political science, I wanted to know whether and how politics, as an explanatory variable, might shed light on this. To understand if and how politics might affect the U.S. Army, I narrowed my research to the impact that politics might have had on the Army's doctrine. I chose doctrine as the dependent variable because the U.S. Army is a doctrine-based organization. Its most important, or what they call capstone doctrine, is its operations field manual. And this is the doctrinal content that I concentrated on. The content and concepts in this field manual dictate how the Army is organized, trained, and equipped, and the type of war or wars it is prepared to fight. At the time I began my research, the Army had updated this capstone doctrine 12 times since 1942, and they updated it just one more time last October. 4 of these additions represent significant shifts in Army organization, training, equipment, and type of war. These were 1954, 62, 76, and 2008. These are highlighted in red. Between 42 and 49, the Army focused exclusively on mid-intensity conventional wars. In 54, however, it shifted its focus to fighting high-intensity nuclear wars. In 62, it made a dramatic shift in the exact opposite direction, moving its focus to fighting low-intensity unconventional wars. With its 1976 edition, it shifted its focus all the way back to exclusively fighting mid-intensity wars. And this is where the Army's doctrinal focus remained for 32 years. It was not until 2008, after fighting 7 years in Afghanistan and 5 years in Iraq, that it finally shifted towards low-intensity unconventional warfare. As I proceeded with my research, I looked for evidence of congruence and causal connections between politics and these 4 doctrinal shifts. I examined politics at 3 levels of analysis in the 3 to 4 years preceding each of these shifts. At the level of U.S. domestic politics, at the level of international politics, and finally at the level of bureaucratic politics between the different U.S. armed forces and between the separate functional branches within the Army's bureaucracy. I found that politics had more of an impact on the Army during the 2 early Cold War cases, 1954 and 1962, and that politics affected doctrine to a lesser extent during the latter 2 cases in 1976 and 2008. I concluded that this occurred because the Army relied less on its doctrine in the early Cold War period than the later Cold War period and post-9/11 period. It began to rely more on its doctrine in parallel with increased professionalization and an all-volunteer force from 1976 and beyond. I believe this greater reliance on doctrine in parallel with greater professionalization helped the Army to insulate itself from politics and can help to explain why politics had less of an impact on the latter 2 cases than the earlier 2 cases. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Juliet Gorson, and I hail from the biology department. When you think about venomous animals, what's the first animal that comes to mind? A snake, a scorpion, a spider. Some of you animal enthusiasts may even say a bee or a jellyfish. But how about a snail? Well, everyone has these fears about being bitten by rattlesnakes or stung by scorpions. Nobody really thinks about getting envenomated by a snail. a very slow snail. Now, canoidean snails are not your typical snails. These marine subtropical snails have evolved the ability to produce complex venoms that they use for predation. Can you believe it? A snail that hunts a fish. My favorite canoidean species is Conus geographus, which has been nicknamed the cigarette snail. Why? Because after being stung by one of these guys, you have just enough time to smoke a cigarette before you die. Our lab takes the complex venoms coming from these snails with the hopes of turning them into drugs. That's right, we go from beach to bench or mollusk to medicine. Venoms are comprised of a cocktail of toxins which we call venom peptides. Each venom in each snail can have up to 200 venom peptides. These peptides will act synergistically within the snail to subdue prey. But if we isolate each of these 200 venom peptides and determine how they are individually interacting with cells, like blocking calcium channels, for example, we can begin to develop them as drug therapies. Terebrids are the family of canoidean snail that I've been studying for the past 5 years. And they're an interesting group because not all individuals in the family are venomous. Diet has always been linked to venom production. A snake that has a lot of different prey types will have a very complex venom compared to one that only eats mice. So we should see a difference in the diet when looking at terebrids that do and don't have a venom gland. The venom gland is the organ that produces the venom. But we didn't see this difference. Terebrids are all eating the same thing. How is this possible? Could the ones without a venom gland be producing venom in a different manner? Or do terebrids not really need a venom gland to subdue their prey, and they've lost the ability over time? We also found that snails without the venom gland have a more diverse diet. And finally, we saw that snails producing different venom peptides are consuming different prey. Terebrids have a unique feeding strategy, and although some of our results follow the typical venom hypotheses, we have discovered some amazing oddities in terebrids that don't seem to exist anywhere else. My research has also produced a list of about 2,000 venom peptides which are being tested on cell lines to potentially be developed into drug therapies. We have already seen promise in using these peptides in killing liver cancer cells, being used as painkillers, and even as a way to induce eating, which could help people with anorexia. So the next time someone asks you about venomous animals, think about the canoidean snail. Thank you.
Good evening. We thought we'd round out the night with a talk about sleepiness and tiredness. Seems apt. My name's Brett Miller. I'm from health psychology and clinical science, and particularly focusing in on HIV prevention, which picks up on one of the presentations earlier too. Decades of sleep science have shown that tiredness impairs our decision making, usually in favor of riskier decisions or decisions that are not so well thought out. And so what I'm pointing out with my research here is potentially what a lot of us already know, and it's certainly what our grandmothers have probably always told us about getting a good rest, night's rest, feeling better in the morning, thinking clearer when you're more awake. So we're familiar with that very early in the morning, the left-hand side, the red kind of danger zone, we're not that great at many tasks. And later at night is another danger zone in terms of feeling tired and suffering from what they call circadian misalignment. So that's having to do things when you're perhaps not at your best for doing them or for doing them well. So in the morning, it's being up at 8 a.m. in a class, if you're a teenager especially, or training for sports. And at night, it could be, driving when we're really tired. So what I'm focusing in on and applying it in terms of sexual risk and HIV is looking at whether circadian misalignment is making us riskier in our decisions, especially given the findings that I'll present soon, that a lot of people are having sex late at night when they're tired. Obviously not too tired. If you're too tired, you won't. But stay with me. As well as sex, I also, in the dissertation, look at drug use and alcohol use decisions because they often happen at 11 at night, 12 at night, 1 at night. But focusing in on the sex piece, we surveyed over 1,000 gay and bisexual men across America, asking about the last time they had sex with a casual partner, whether they used condoms, and that really reflects the HIV prevention interests. So the results, if we click to the next slide, I cheated on the one slide rule. Technically, we found that if you group it all together, the majority of sex is really happening at night, which is what we'd expect. Almost 2/3 are saying that the casual sex that had occurred with condoms had last occurred from 5 p.m. onwards, and obviously much later too. That's in the blue, that's the blue lines. 37% of men said yes, that last time sex with condoms had happened, it was at or later than my usual time of being tired. But it was even later and for sex without condoms, which I'm arguing is the riskier behavior. This was especially so for younger men, which is another thing we'd probably assume, that younger guys are less disciplined in the way that they're maintaining sleep health or they're out later. 56% of guys under 30 said that sex without condoms had last occurred later than their usual time of tiredness, and I think that's a factor. It shifted a little with chronotype, whether you're a morning person or an evening person, but even among the morning types, a lot of them were still having sex very, very late, and presumably suffering from circadian misalignment. So we explored this also in relation to their level of desire for sex, and you might or might not be surprised that 2/3 of men said tiredness doesn't really get in the way. So what I think we have is a lot of people having sex when they're tired, not being physically impaired by that tiredness in terms of the capacity to have the sex, but perhaps suffering in their decision-making about condom use and other considerations. The same kind of safety thinking, I think, also applies to alcohol and drug use, as I said, and that comes up later in the dissertation. But to sum up, I really think that HIV prevention researchers need to look more closely at sleep health, tiredness when people are making decisions, and to work out ways to increase public awareness about this. The same way we know that driving late is risky, I'd love for us all to be thinking more about these links. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm just overwhelmed by the wealth of knowledge and expertise and passion and clarity with which everyone spoke. So all I can say really is to all our presenters is thank you and express my immense admiration for the knowledge you've imparted. More than a few bits, I'm taking something away from every single one of you. So let me invite everyone to join in thanking them, but also in making what I hope is a good decision. It's early enough, we're not impaired. So please join us at a reception just steps away out the door. Join me in thanking our presenters. Congratulations and thanks.